locally, which are truly disturbing and staggering. I have also with me Russell Coleman, who was recently the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Kentucky, who's a genuine expert on this, and of course our own Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, was a part of the forum and is here as well. So I'm going to call on Josh first to just lay out the statistical challenges we're confronting, and then we'll go to Attorney General Cameron, to former U.S. Attorney Russell Coleman, and then I'm going to come back in and wrap it up, and then we'll be glad to respond to some questions. So, Josh, you want to?
Thank you, Senator McConnell, and thank all you for being here today. Unfortunately, for many of you, this will not be new information, but for much of Louisville's recent history, we were a relatively safe city for a city our size. From 1980 to 2014, we averaged just over 54 homicides a year. That's pretty good for a city our size. Unfortunately, things changed in 2015. We eclipsed 80 homicides for the first time since the 1970s. 2016, we had our then deadliest year ever with 116 murders. Things sort of flattened out for the next few years and then exploded again in 2020 with 173 murders, and then last year with 183. Unfortunately, so far this year, we've had 50 homicides. That's on pace to eclipse last year, where we had 47 at this point. Unfortunately, it's not just murders that have increased over that time period, though. It is non-fatal shootings as well. And in just the last 2 years, 2019 to 2021, carjackings in the city of Louisville are up more than 300%. Now, those are all data points. Those are all numbers that are faceless. But every one of those numbers represents a real individual, a brother, a sister, a mother, a father, a son, a daughter. Fortunately, much of what was discussed in the meeting, however, were solutions for these problems. For as long as there have been cities, there have been violence in cities. And so we know what works. Cities have reduced violence in the past, and we can reduce it again. I look forward to the action items coming out of this meeting and improved safety in the city of Louisville as a result.
Josh, thank you for that. And Leader McConnell, I want to thank you for doing what I like to call is being a convening authority, getting all the relevant stakeholders in the room together to discuss sort of the challenges, but more importantly, as Josh alluded to, some ideas for how we can move forward to put a stop to the challenges we have here as it relates to the homicide and violent crime that we see here in Louisville. Russell, I want to thank you for moderating that conversation and being willing to sacrifice your time, even though you're not the U.S. Attorney anymore. You continue to be very interested in ways to confront these challenges that we have here in Louisville. To you all that are here today, thank you for being willing to have this conversation and to spotlight and amplify the message. I was excited to hear from Chief Shields and Commonwealth's Attorney Tom Wine about their perspective. Again, I think having folks in the room, relevant stakeholders, Christopher 2X and the Game Changers team, to Dr. Martin over at the University of Louisville Hospital, they are important and integral to figuring out ways we can move forward meaningfully to curtail the homicides and the violent crime we have here in Louisville. So thank you all again for being willing to help amplify this message.
Thank you, Leader General. In 2019, long before Louisville's difficult 2020, and I stood at a podium much like this with flags behind me. Some of you all were present. David Lawrence Smith sat in the front row. And we were touting the fact that we'd increased federal firearms prosecutions, that prosecutions of trigger pullers by almost 70%. We were pleased with that. We were collaborating. But in standing at that podium, there was a recognition that we were still failing. 2019, we had over 90 homicides in this city. The next year, we had the highest number of homicides in the history of Louisville in 2020, and we exceeded that in 2021. So standing at that podium, there was a sense of failure. And those of us who carry badges, those of us, in my case, who did, are convicted by this. I'm raising a family here too. Senator McConnell, our Attorney General, wanted to bring together those that are tasked with bringing these numbers down to talk about solutions, not to chew on data, not to have a pilot project or some sort of debating society, but to talk about solutions. We talked about group violence intervention, doing that the right way, something that works, has worked, been demonstrated to work in cities large and small. We talked about adequately funding a police department. We talked about having enough officers to reduce crime, because a point of data that's not in contention is more officers results in less crime. We talked about better collaboration. We talked about how the feds can continue to do more to focus on violent crime, continue to do more to come alongside our partners in LMPD, because we know at the end of the day, law enforcement is essentially, public safety is essentially a state and local matter, but the feds can play a dramatic impact in reducing those numbers. And so we spent time over the last hour or so talking about infants who have a significant number of seizures because they've been shot in the head as a victim of violence. We saw pictures of babies. This was tough stuff. And these leaders behind me and those that joined us on our left and our right upstairs talked about how we reduced that, how we protected kids. And there will be action items. And as a citizen, someone who lives here and cares about public safety, I'm grateful for the leadership I saw upstairs just a moment ago.
Finally, let me add, obviously on a lot of these issues, there's joint cooperation at the federal, state, and local government, and we had representatives in the meeting from all of those entities. But one thing is clearly and totally a federal responsibility, and that's the border. And I asked the people at our forum a while ago to what extent the almost totally open border we have has exacerbated all of the challenges they have. And there was a unified agreement that the failure to control the border, which, by the way, a couple of years ago was actually under control, has only exacerbated all the problems that we discussed today. And with that, I'll be happy to open it up for questions of any of us.
You all have mentioned speaking about action items. Are there any of those that you all can reveal today to let community members know the steps that will be taken in the future?
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
The action items that were mentioned today, can you explain what any of those were?
Action items that
Yeah.
were raised.
Well, I think, first of all, I think in terms of what's clearly federal responsibility, action items are to get the border under control. And as you know, the administration is apparently going to sign off on claiming the COVID challenge is over. Title 42, COVID challenge is over, therefore making the border situation even worse. But then examples of very local interagency cooperation. Russell, you want to address that?
I do, and for us to talk about the border, critics may say this is just a red meat issue, right? The reality is every bit of the dope that we're seeing in this district, every bit of the fentanyl, every bit of the methamphetamine, every bit of those substances that are killing our kids, they're not produced in meth labs anymore. Every bit of it comes from Mexico. Every bit of it comes from the southwest border. And we know that we know how to shut this down. We know that in early 2020, when the southwest border was shut down because of COVID, we know that we started to see methamphetamine and fentanyl dry up. Not in far-flung cities, start to dry up in Louisville, in Bowling Green, and Paducah. We know that when the border is secured, these dangerous drugs are harder to come by and the price point is higher. I do want to, in terms of action items, you've heard me mention this many times. I want my colleague, Josh Crawford, to talk to you a little bit about group violence intervention and what we're doing here, something that works, has worked in cities large and small, and we spent a lot of time talking about this upstairs.
So in any given city, Louisville included, a very small percentage of your population is responsible for the majority of your violence. In any given city, it's about 0.5% of your population, about 5% of your offenders that are responsible for more than 50% of your violence. That is true here and is being addressed, hopefully as a part of the group violence intervention effort. And there has been a tremendous amount of federal money that has been pushed down over the last several years into state and local governments. And one of the conversations today is on how to leverage some of those federal dollars to enhance public safety within the community. LMPD obviously has significant recruitment and retention issues with the number of officers that they are down. Can those resources be leveraged there? There is also the pernicious problem of a growing number of juveniles who are involved in very violent acts, carjackings especially, but non-fatal shootings and homicides as well, and how to best address those individuals that are somewhat left behind by the existing system.
Anybody else?
Senator McConnell, I know you've been visiting Kentucky, different places in Kentucky while Senate's on break, and you've talked about the midterms, and I know that your PAC's been involved with that. If Republicans are able to win back the Senate and the House this fall, beyond, I know what you talked about in terms of blocking President Biden's more liberal priorities, what policies would you want to see a Republican Congress enact next year?
Yeah, if I'm fortunate enough to be by the way, I've been the majority leader, I've been the minority leader, majority's better. If I'm fortunate enough to be the majority leader, we're going to focus on the issues that are important to the American people. Inflation, crime, what we've been discussing here today, and the federal role in that. Increasing domestic energy production. The administration is still strangling local U.S. energy production. In a general way, I think we have, even at the federal level, some discussion about the trends in education across the country, even though that's almost entirely a state and local matter. In short, I think the Republican agenda in a majority Republican Senate would be directly related to the things that the American people have on their minds in this fall's election. What we will not be doing is additional spending and borrowing. Had I been the majority leader last year, for example, we would not have approved dumping $2 trillion on the economy, which has produced, as Larry Summers, Bill Clinton, Secretary of the Treasury, predicted, 40-year high inflation. So we would try to rein in the spending habits of the administration, try to be encouraging them to send more pragmatic, centrist nominees to various boards and agencies that will come up to us for confirmation. We know that we can't achieve a totally Republican agenda with a Democratic president, but when you have divided government, you still can look for things you can agree on. I'll give an example of one last year that I participated in that I think was good for the country and bipartisan, and that was the infrastructure bill. About a month ago, we passed a postal reform bill. So if we have divided government, I think the message to the president will be quit all the left-wing stuff, move to the center, and work on things you can agree on. Okay, thanks everybody.